Look, this man has made his way back to New York. He's probably doing some commentary and analysis on the Trump trial there. You know his voice from London radio. You know his voice and face both from New York television, network television, Fox News, West Coast, East Coast. He is one of the most coveted people doing legal analysis in this country. The former federal prosecutor, now working the defense side of the table. He's David Katz, everyone. Hello,
Great
sir.
to be with you.
Are you there for analysis, David? Are you doing some media while you're there?
I haven't been down into the courtroom or the overflow room. You have to get there so early, and it's become, kind of like an Academy Awards ticket by now, which is another reason why I think it should be televised. Now there's like this sort of media elite only that can get past the velvet rope. I think it's a really bad look for our system of justice, but they say that actually it's against the law in New York to televise a trial. Now, of course, the legislature could change the law, and with all the things that the legislature is doing in New York, you'd think they would have done that. But anyway, it's not televised. But I was on, I've been on Fox, I've been on CNN, I was on Newsmax today, and it was interesting because the other guest and I, he was the real conservative one, I'm the middle of the road one. We both went to Berkeley. So I said, if you'd have wagered that there were going to be two guests on Newsmax today who both were Berkeley undergrads, you would have made a chunk of change.
Boy, Newsmax is your. Of course, I agree with you 100%. I said that this trial should have been televised. I said it from the start. But is it your sense that it's generally being fairly portrayed or represented in the representations that you see in some of this right-wing media where you appear on Newsmax, Fox News, this kind of thing?
Well, not really, because on Newsmax, it's always a negative spin. I can, I can be heard, and they like having me on because there are some things that legitimately, and we'll talk about it. From the beginning of this case, I'm a Democrat. From the time that this case was brought by the DA's office here in New York City, I said this was a bridge too far. I said, if this is all they're going to charge Trump with, because this was the first to actually be criminally charged. It's also the first to go to trial. That's in part because Trump and his lawyers have been so successful, Mark, in delaying the other trials, especially the January 6th trial. And of course, we've talked about this until the cows come home, that they never should have filed Jack Smith, who I admire greatly in his work on this case. But he never should have filed down the Southern District of Florida, where he had a 1 in 3 chance of getting Cannon because he got her. That case is obviously by now never going to trial before her or any reassigned judge before the election. The one in Washington, D.C. actually does have a chance. But to answer your question about the coverage of this one, to talk about it being a circus, it's turned into a total circus down here. If you actually are down there, which I'm not, because it's so hard to get into the traffic and everything. You have to get up so early in the morning. It's just not worth doing, and it's also rained here the last couple of days. But I mean, the circus show is unending now. People like letting off balloons, doing things to get attention. The Congress members in favor of Trump, the super right wingers are down there. Of course, they're all on Newsmax being, shown off. They actually lost their quorum, I think, or their ability to act in Congress today, because so many of them, this is not a joke, so many of them are down there, singing the praises of Trump and saying how this case, has no basis. That's not true. The case has quite a basis, but you do have to believe Michael Cohen to get to the felony, I believe, beyond a reasonable doubt. And if you only get to the misdemeanor, then it's like disappearing ink. If they come back and say, Your Honor, we made a compromise, we've all agreed only on the misdemeanor, the answer to that will be, well, then the case is dismissed because only the misdemeanor, the statute of limitations has run on. So it's really the felony or bust for the DA's office. And that's the hard one with Michael Cohen because, they keep saying Michael Cohen is corroborated by the documents, Mark. He's corroborated that he made a phone call. He's corroborated that after he made a phone call, he set up that account from which he paid Stormy Daniels. But he's not corroborated on someone other than me can tell you that Trump knew that it was breaking campaign finance laws to do this. And without that bump up, without that specific knowledge and intent by Trump, I think they're going to fall short of the felony threshold. Especially because there may be some people in the jury, whether the judge tells them this or not, who thinks This is going to be the cycle of getting one ex-president after another, unless I demand a very high level of proof here. And
So
some
to be
people think
so
that
to
that's
be clear, David, when he talks about the fact that Trump had no interest in necessarily keeping it from Melania, Melania wasn't a relevant concern to Donald Trump. That doesn't speak, it doesn't quite meet that threshold that you're talking about, which is, yeah, whatever. He has to know that he's violating campaign laws by doing this.
if the jury believes when they all convene and they have to vote unanimously if they're going to find him guilty of any particular count, if they get together and they say, a really plausible scenario after hearing Cohen is that Trump absolutely knew that this was a campaign violation, either state campaign violation or federal campaign violation. The defense lawyers may even ask for a specific verdict where they say, if you find Trump guilty, do you find him guilty because he violated state campaign finance laws? Yes or no. Federal finance laws? Yes or no. If they check the box only that he violated federal campaign law, then there's an issue. Can you prosecute in state court somebody for a felony if their only intent was to violate federal campaign finance laws? So the good match is all 12 agree, and it can be shown that all 12 agreed that in this case in state court, Trump knew and intended to violate state campaign finance laws. If they believe Cohen, they're going to do that. If they disbelieve Cohen, and this is what he doesn't have corroboration on, they may either hang or all agree just on a misdemeanor, which is a law for the prosecution.
Right. And just let me follow then and say, I know we're obsessing about Michael Cohen because he's on the stand now and he's being and I'd love to talk about that cross-examination here in a second. But the reality is, I thought the prosecutors made a pretty good case for the notion that when they had, for example, Pecker on the stand, when they talked about the catch and kill scheme, they were speaking to the political ramifications of the news and the rumors and the stories getting out. And Pecker was loaded up to catch and kill those stories. And that was for political reasons. Does that meet the threshold? No. You're saying he had to know that there were. Again, I don't mean to press this, but I'm just trying to. I thought the prosecution made a very good case for the fact that this was all a political containment exercise. They were trying to contain political damage. And that case was made before Michael Cohen got to the stand. But you're saying that that's not sufficient.
I found that very persuasive. On top of that, they also showed that he's a meticulous person, that Trump is he's a penny pincher. He wants to, watch every penny. Would he have given $420,000 reimbursement to Cohen to compensate $130,000 plus a little add-on and then enough for Cohen supposedly to be able to pay his taxes? Would he have done that without knowing what the intent of it is? To me, all of that proves him guilty of the misdemeanor. It proves that beyond a reasonable doubt, Trump falsified and participated in falsifying those records, and that he directed it and that he was guilty of that. But only falsifying the records, you have to then go on to bump it up to the felony that he intended to commit some other unlawful act. And that other unlawful act would have to be a campaign finance violation. Now, if he just didn't want it to come out, and again, the jurors come back and say, I think it could have been for the finance purposes, like Pecker set up this catch and kill to help him in the election. But then the whole case comes down not so much to what Pecker did, although that was essential to show, and the DA did a very good job, but it comes down to the reimbursement. So once Trump is the president and he reimburses and signed those checks, reimbursing for legal expenses, okay, can they prove that beyond a reasonable doubt? If a lot of his motive, the jury ends up thinking, was he still didn't want the shame of it. Now, they showed some evidence that he said to one of his aides, one of the female aides who testified, wow, it's sure great that this didn't come out during the election. But Mark, it's great that it didn't come out during the election, whether he had the specific intent to impede it coming out during the election. So he's got to have the same intent that Edwards had. And Edwards never was convicted, although he was charged by the feds. And this is one reason that I thought that the DA's office should have been more cautious and not brought this case, because when he brought this case, he knew already that the federal government, the Southern District of New York, which is an elite prosecutorial unit like the one I was in Los Angeles, if they couldn't make the case, if our federal offices couldn't make the case, we have real advantages in federal court. When people tell you that they were federal prosecutors and they won all their cases, of course we should. And you should bring cases that you can win. And I won all my cases. But it is easier to win cases in federal court. There are a lot of reasons why. They're so well investigated. You have the FBI, the IRS, the special task forces. You have federal judges who are, if you ask the average lawyer, they would say, is it more likely you're going to win a federal case than a state case? They'd say you're probably more likely to win a federal case. With all of that, and this was not under Trump and Barr. This was under the U.S. attorney selected by Biden and serving in the Biden administration. And they said, we are not going on this case, the very case that's being brought now. And that one would have been easier in the sense that all they had to show is a knowledge of federal campaign law and that he intended to violate federal campaign laws. Because it's also a plausible defense to say, look, maybe Trump, who never run for a federal office or state office, maybe he knew in general that there was this law that you have to completely disclose all of your campaign contributions in a federal case, but that he knew in a state case. Was he focused on a state case? If he wasn't focusing and intending on that. And then the other thing that they're trying to suggest right now is that Cohen had a lot of money, which I really didn't understand that part of it, that he has this ongoing millionaire's lifestyle. And apparently
a lot of that lifestyle came from being appointed Trump's personal attorney, having a White House connection.
He apparently still is making a lot of money and spending a lot of money, and his family still lives in some kind of Trump property. They brought that out. And the idea of that was that, this is a man who might have actually dipped into his own pocket for the $130,000 because he wanted federal office. It was right before the election. You knew how desperately Trump wanted this. He did this so Trump would remember him and give him a job in the White House or give him a job as Attorney General or Deputy Attorney General. He didn't give him any of those jobs. So the theory is that he was so embittered by that. And as he's learning that, the one idea is that he says, you know what, I know I contributed this money out of my pocket. I really did this. I know I set up this company. But remember the corroboration that Trump told him to do all of those things. A lot of that does hinge on Michael Cohen. So then Michael Cohen realizes that he's not going to get this job. And then Trump says, you know what, I'm going to let this guy down a little easy because he helped me for all those years. He was my fixer. He was good enough for that, but he wasn't good enough to come to the White House or get any federal kind of job with me. I'm going to push him to one side, let him be my fixer again, private lawyer, whatever. And I know it's excessive, but I'll give him the $400,000. If that's what Trump was thinking, again, is there the specific intent to violate state or federal campaign finance laws by writing down legal expenses? And Trump also has the suggestion, because all he has to do is raise a reasonable doubt, that, legal expenses, he figured the guy had done a lot of lawyering on this. He dealt with this other guy, Davidson. He not only dealt with a Stormy Daniels, but he dealt with a Karen McDougal. He'd come down to Washington. He'd done all this kind of stuff. So I don't know, 400,000 sounds about right. He'd space it out over a year. So the case could go either way. I think people just have to make their peace. On the left, they have to make their peace that it may not be a conviction. On the right, they have to make their peace that it may well be a conviction. And I think both sides are kind of like, oh my God. But I think it's sort of up for grabs at the moment.
That's fascinating. It really is fascinating because so much is clear and there's so much smear here. There's so many facts that are embarrassing, that are controversial, but embarrassing and controversial doesn't get it done legally. You really draw the legal line so clearly and starkly. And as you say, the feds, who I think this is worth underscoring, have all that leverage and power to which you've referred. They passed on this. So there's, if you look at them as any kind of bellwether legally, maybe we have to prepare ourselves for the fact that he may be acquitted.
Can I mention one other thing, or have a hung jury? Can I mention one other thing too? Is that I won't mention he's deceased now, but he was a real famous attorney. He had an office next to mine 15 years ago. He had a super high profile case. I'm not going to mention him or the case because everybody would know it. He represented this person and he said to him, I know you're going to try your case in the newspapers. You're going to get a lot of media attention on your case. That's not my strategy. If you're going to do that, I'm not going to represent you. No, you're such a great lawyer. I want to have you. You're going to be my lawyer. He said to him, listen, you're going to say you got a call out of the blue. You got attacked by somebody. You defended yourself in the media. You're going to try your case in the media. So listen to me again. If you want me to be your lawyer, I'm going to quit as soon as you do that. Don't come to me with a story. It was an ambush. Don't try your case in the media. First time the client tried the case in the media, the lawyer quit, and it went to another lawyer. You sort of wonder why the DA's office didn't say something like that to Michael Cohen at the beginning. I know how much you want this case to be brought. And here's the thing, it's going to get worse if you wear a T-shirt that shows Trump, behind bars. It's going to get worse if you say that he's an animal who should be caged up in prison, left to rot. It's going to get worse if you do any of those things. So you're not going to do any of those things, right, Michael? And Michael's going to say, yeah, I'm not going to do any of those things. And you say, look, the case is really going to be worse and maybe not be sustainable if you're going to do the things that give ammunition to the other side like this. So are we communicating it? And I don't, maybe that would have had to be disclosed, and maybe he would have been cross-examined that he was told in no uncertain terms not to do that, and that they would actually drop charges or drop the case, because, they have a lot of discretion and they don't need to continue with the case. But, one of the things that they've used against Michael Cohen, and they used the same thing with Stormy Daniels, when Stormy Daniels said, I owe Trump $500,000. I know a judge ordered me to pay it. I'm not going to pay it. I'd go to jail before I would pay him a nickel. And Michael Cohen with the same idea that, yeah, I know the DA tells me all the time to, tamp it down, to not make statements to the press. And guess what? I do them anyway. They just look like such defiant witnesses. You think, how do I know they're telling me the truth? I'm going to send a former president, like him or not, I'm going to send a former president to jail for potentially 4 years. I think they have to know that, this you face prison. They don't think this is a pure probation case. It's a felony that's being tried. They don't know the specific sentence, although they kind of know that he's going to go to prison, because guess what? Michael Cohen keeps making these statements, how much he wants him to go to prison and how much he'd like him to get convicted in this case and go to prison in this case. So I just think, and Michael had another one today. Michael Cohen says that a really critical conversation that he had where he called up Schiller, who's the body man for Trump. And that was how Trump answered a lot of his phone calls. Again, Trump didn't want to leave an email. You could say, what does that tell you about a person? But proof beyond a reasonable doubt, because someone doesn't like to email, someone doesn't like to get direct phone calls. He says that he called Schiller, he got Trump on the phone, he told Trump, this is exactly how it's going to go down with the Stormy Daniels, with the reimbursement. I explained to him, chapter and verse during that conversation that this was bad and we were doing something illegal. Well, now it turns out that during that conversation, which the defense has pinpointed, there was conversation about some 14-year-old who was stalking or giving a real hard time to Michael Cohen, and he wanted to bring in the Secret Service. Now they say, well, wasn't that what the conversation was about? Never mentioned by the prosecution, apparently not known to the jury. They're finding this out on cross. Michael Cohen says, oh yeah, we talked about that too. Yeah, we talked about both of those subjects. The conversation was 96 seconds long. That is what you call effective impeachment. That's what you call good cross-examination. So, and Michael Cohen comes back really well. He hasn't freaked out. He's doing much better than he did in the case where the judge said he was credible. So he's doing better in the case where the judge said he was credible. So maybe I'm missing the whole thing. Maybe I've been on a right-wing media one time too many.
Well, let me ask you, just on balance then, net, Michael Cohen, worth having, necessary, evil, or would you have been better off planning the case without Michael Cohen?
They couldn't have done it without Michael Cohen, because there's nothing that helps them over that burden. If he doesn't say that I told him exactly how this was going to work and that it was a violation of the law and he wanted to do it anyway. Because remember, at one point there's this tape, but the tape isn't that helpful to this theory to get you to the felony, because on the tape, Trump wants to pay him cash. And Michael says, no, I got this covered. Okay. What's going to be argued to the jury by Trump's defense is that he was a lawyer. He hadn't been disbarred in all the years he'd been practicing, which was many years. I knew that. He'd worked for me many years, the Trump defense will say. He told me he had it worked out. I didn't think he was going to go get himself disbarred over this one. So I figured it was legal. He had some way that was, I would have paid her cash and not had all these records, but he had some way to do this that he said it was going to all work out. So I'm sorry to spend so much time on this case, but I
think it's fascinating. No, I don't apologize in the least. It's fascinating. It really is fascinating. And so much is being made of the impeaching of Michael Cohen, the credibility of Michael Cohen. And I think you really put into context a lot of this stuff that we've seen, the kind of smack talking that Michael Cohen has done prior to this case beginning, and how that might come back and bite him, or maybe has already come back to bite him. I wonder if I can leave the world of Trump, unless there's something else you can think of. And I wanted to
I wanted to mention just one last thing, because
sure.
they have asked me on a lot of the media what I think is going to happen next. This is going to be the people's last witness. It looks like they're preserving some time for next week, which may be that there's some indication that Trump is going to actually put on a defense case. People have asked what kind of defense case. Trump will not testify. You could take that to the bank. Trump will not testify. He didn't testify with Mueller, although he really, really wanted to. And he's not going to testify in this case, I think, no matter what he says. People wonder whether Schiller might be a witness. Maybe Schiller would be a witness to that phone call, that he could say during that phone call, I remember it was all about the 14-year-old. And in the 96 seconds, we didn't talk about anything with Stormy Daniels. That would be pretty devastating. You could, of course, impeach him that he's the ultimate Trump loyalist. It might also be that he might remember something. He was the body man outside the door, apparently, when Stormy Daniels was in there. She says for over 2 hours, as I understood her testimony. If him or someone else is going to say she was only in there 20 minutes, the satirists say, well, that shows just how short a time Trump lasted. But the truth is that it would be very great cross-examination of Stormy Daniels if she was only in there 20 minutes and what she described were all that talking and this and that, and she goes to the bathroom and she comes out. That would be devastating cross-examination. And, Bill Maher already played a tape of his from 3 or 4 years ago when he interviewed Stormy Daniels, where she said this was totally consensual. I'm not part of the Me Too. It's nothing like that at all. Now her testimony is that he stood in the way of the door. She felt there was a power differential or something like that. She actually felt very coerced. People are talking about that. That was not her testimony. That was not what she said to Bill Maher on tape years ago. So, if you step back from this, Mark, and this is why I had reservations about this case from the very beginning, and I expressed them on your show. The January 6th case, so righteous in my opinion. The tamping down, the not stopping the riot, the hanging Mike Pence, the build up to it, the incendiary speech, the slates, great case. That you pointed this out. The Mar-a-Lago case is open and shut, should have been brought in Washington, D.C. in a federal court there was lots of venue. But this is the weakest case, and a lot of its weaknesses are being exposed.
Wow. It's fascinating to see the way the bones of this case get reviewed by right-wing or liberal media, and you can come up with different facts. And one of the things I really like about you, David, I'm not just blowing sunshine right here, is that you just give it to us straight. Like sometimes it's just time to take our medicine on this. It may not be the case that everybody thought it was, notwithstanding the salacious details and the kind of the creepy aspect to the whole thing. So. Now, I want to ask you about the SCOTUS case today, only because I'm wondering if there aren't certain realities reflected in the SCOTUS case. It involves this Consumer Protection Bureau, which was formed, I think, under Obama by Elizabeth Warren. It was one of the things I really liked about Elizabeth Warren, that I really believe Elizabeth Warren, and I understand politics is full of all these unholy deals you have to make, and I'm sure she's made a bunch, and, she's not pure. No one can pass the purity tests that are offered up on either end. But with all of that in the preamble, she helped create this Consumer Protection Agency, and those payday lenders went to the Supreme Court to try to undermine the power, doing it through funding, as I understand it, that the Consumer Protection Agency was going to have. Can you speak to this new SCOTUS decision? Tell us what this just happened, what was decided in the future then, and what it might reflect about the court.
Well, your younger viewers may say that I've been affected by long experience, but I still remember the lesser of two evils. I remember an era when the country wasn't that polarized, and people went to the polls and said, okay, this is the lesser of two evils. I don't like Goldwater. I'm voting for LBJ. Not my dream candidate, not Jack Kennedy, but I got Lyndon Johnson on the one hand, and I got Goldwater on the other hand. And, I hope people reflect on that. The people who may want to vote for RFK Jr. on a lark, or they want to do whatever they want to do, it's Trump or Biden. That's all it is. It's Trump or Biden. If you don't come out and vote for Biden, you're going to get Trump. That's it. That's all you need to know. And Elizabeth Warren, I'm sure she was better than the person that she ran against. And so that's good enough for me about Elizabeth Warren. So the Supreme Court case was very interesting. Anytime that you agree with Justice Thomas's decision, and the fascinating thing about this one is that maybe Thomas is sort of thinking, why do I need to be this super right winger? Because I would say with this decision, he's not on the far right of the court. I think Alito has clearly staked out that position as the most far out to the right because he dissented, and Gorsuch joined him. Thomas wrote the decision, and Thomas said, look, it's pretty simple. There's an appropriations clause, and the way they appropriated the money for this agency did not violate the appropriations clause. It doesn't have to be a yearly appropriation of $20 million to do this. You can also say that to do these purposes, you state the purpose and you state the source. And the source could be 1% of the money that the Federal Reserve has to meet the needs of the agency. That's good enough. It doesn't have to be like a line item where you say $20 million. It can end up being $22 million because it's calculated to spend on their purposes, which is to protect consumers in various ways. And it can be drawn from the Federal Reserve. But people were really scared about this one because this was a reversal in the Supreme Court. There were 3 Trump-appointed judges in the Fifth Circuit who'd all agreed that this was not a proper way to fund this agency, and therefore all of the agency's acts were illegal. They would have knocked out 13 years of rules and regulations to protect consumers passed by this federal agency if the Supreme Court had gone the other way. They didn't. 7-2, Justice Thomas writing, they said that this was completely proper, which I think means from this that these attacks on funding as ways to knock out federal regulations, I think are going to fail. I think this fad is over. But had this fad kept on, they would have probably tried to knock the Federal Reserve and say the Federal Reserve, by assessing money from banks, is also in violation of the appropriations clause. Luckily, I think this far right-wing fad has ended now with only Alito and Gorsuch willing to go down with that ill-fated. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. I mean, as one of the concurring opinions said, you guys don't even watch how the country's been running for 200 and some years, because for 200 and some years, we haven't had these strict appropriations that have to be a line item in the budget. We've been funding the government this way for over 200 years. You guys really are a bunch of radicals. And I think that's one reason that Thomas wrote it, because Thomas could say, look at the historical context. When it comes to guns, I don't agree with him. But this literal historical approach led him to the result that this was properly funded agency. And so I think that that's why he was eager to write that opinion and join the 7. And welcome aboard, Clarence.
Well, it's fascinating to see, as you say, Alito and Gorsuch fall into the category of these corporate hacks. I mean, I think, you can call them right wing. It's corporate business surrogates, really. I'm not even going to call them friendly. I mean, because they're brutal to consumers, and they're brutal to those that have to live under kind of the reckless disregard for consumers that you find in predatory lending, et cetera. And now I wonder about as you say, this is a really good sign. We've talked about the EPA before and some of the jurisdictional aspects and restrictions that have come before the court when it comes to the EPA and these other agencies that have, yes, regulatory power, but those are protective powers. Those are environmental protections. In this case, these are consumer protections. And you see the power of government to do good. And so to me, it's a pretty big day when at least we have some of those protections left in place.
Well, Mark, the 2 that we're waiting for in the environmental field, that we're getting down there. Presidential immunity will come down fairly soon. There's a lot of big cases that there's a couple of social media cases. Yeah. There's 2 social media cases that people are waiting for. But the big one in the environmental field, there's the SEC one. But the really big one is the Chevron deference. And I think Chevron deference after this is going to have at least 6 votes. Maybe Clarence Thomas will get with it. I don't know. He may have written already against Chevron deference. So it may be the 3, that triumvirate of Gorsuch, Alito, and Thomas. But I think 6 votes are going to say that Chevron deference is fine. Remember, that's the one where they don't specify in the statute how you're going to pay for people to inspect fishing boats. but fishing boats need to be inspected. So they say, you know what, everybody has to pay a small amount to do that. The statute didn't spell it out. Someone has to pay for these inspectors to be on board. And so we come up with a regulatory scheme, although the statute doesn't specify who's going to pay. As long as it's reasonable, that's fine. The arch conservatives, the corporate, what do you call them? The corporate
hacks is what I said.
would say that unless it's spelled out in the statute, and I mean, it's Congress. The idea they can spell out every single thing, not only say that there need to be inspectors and they need to be on boats and these kind of boats on these kinds of emissions or things that they sail on. They also have to specify who's going to pay for them. No, if you're going to have inspectors, you come up with some reasonable regulations how to pay for them. That's good enough. And that's going to save an awful lot of agency action, Mark, because otherwise everything would be attacked. Everything in the regulations, they would say, is not in the statute. And they would have extended this case, which was not about fishing. It was about whether you and I and everybody else has protection from terrible environmental hazards, from all food and drug laws, if we have all that, and we need all that. The people who say, well, all regulation is overregulation. Sure, overregulation's awful, and people need to do more about it. I have some libertarian tendencies, like a lot of people do, but you can't just say, well, let's not have regulation because look at California. You couldn't breathe the air. The first time I came to California, you couldn't breathe the air. And now you can. We have lots and lots of other problems, but we cleaned up our smog and our air. How do you think that happened? Through good laws and regulations that protect all of us.
Bravo. I couldn't agree more. I mean, these are protections, and you can't always view these regulations as encumbrances. They are good things, particularly when it comes to the environment. And so, yeah, I'm so glad you pointed out the fishing thing had nothing to do with what this is really about. It was just a portal through which everything was being passed. Now, I have a final question for you, David Katz. You've been so generous with your time, but I want to ask you about the university unrest. I had said this at the very beginning. Listeners and viewers of this show will remember that I said there are going to be lawsuits about this because I'm not sending my kid to whatever university here in California or anywhere in the country without the expectation that sort of basic things are in place to ensure the security of my kid who's a student at that school. And sure enough, these things have gone off the rails at all these universities and colleges everywhere, and now parents are forming class action suits to say, hey, just that. You guys now are going to pay for the fact that you did not ensure a safe environment for my child. What are the viabilities associated with those kinds of legal actions?
I think that the courts are going to be pretty sympathetic toward the schools because the schools do have a tough balancing act. And my goodness, I mean, schools, both public and private, are expensive enough. At some point, we're talking about regulations. Some of these things, in my book at least, are sort of over regulations that the school, especially private schools, have the right to do a balancing of their own. And if you don't like the fact that they have an encampment at the private university that you're sending your kid to, have your kid transfer the next year. Have it be known, right, when people apply from high schools, that they allow these demonstrations at these private schools that are really disturbing to a lot of people. Send your kids somewhere else.
But wait a minute, David. I don't mean to interrupt. And by the way, I don't necessarily support the lawsuit. I just think it's a very provocative notion. But I do want to push back on you and say, hey, it's not the encampments. My kid was shoved and was prevented from attending class because of a lot of these protests. They weren't peacefully collected in some kind of encampment. That's a dangerous thing, isn't it?
Yes, that's a lack of police protection that it could be actionable, for just not providing, it's like if they didn't have a lighted area at a college or a university, public or private, and people kept getting mugged there. And I think especially if there was repeated conduct, if the school was on notice that someone was insulted, like Jewish students were insulted, it's one thing to issue, to say slogans and stuff like that. But you have, in addition to this sort of free speech issue, you have also just the personal harassment. You can't personally get in someone's face and issue fighting words. You certainly can't attack them physically. So I wasn't quite sure that's what you were asking about. But yes, those lawsuits. But I think the class actions are more not that somebody was personally struck. I think it was that some slogans went too far. And of course, there also will be, let me just say, there'll be lawsuits on the other side. There are also lawsuits by people who say that their constitutional rights were infringed because they weren't allowed to protest more, or they say that they were forcibly removed and more force was exerted. But I think that these schools, whether public or private, can say, look, you just can't camp out. I mean, I was in demonstrations, so I'm not like some old conservative who doesn't get it. I was in demonstrations. We demonstrated against the war. I was in the mobilization against the war. But people went home at night. And the last few decades, I guess these schools have gotten in the habit of permitting these demonstrations to go on and not end, and then people camp out and stuff like that. And I think the encampments are just not a good situation. I think the courts are going to say that you can't camp out at other places, and no, you can't camp out at the university. It presents all kinds of different problems, and I think if schools address that, I think they'll probably be safe from lawsuits. Although I'm not practicing in that field, but I just think that there'll be sort of a common sense rule, and that if they don't allow the encampments, or they say, you can camp out one night, but tomorrow night you have to leave, and then they give warnings and people still don't leave, I think that they can detain them and even arrest them. Because if you just fail to disperse and go beyond the reasonable time, place, and manner of the demonstration, I think that you've probably gone too far under the law. So I just don't think the class actions are going to be that. They may get some injunctions and stuff like that. And I think that I don't know, it's kind of hard to know where they're going to go, Mark, but I don't think that either side is going to have great success in court. I think that it's good. I think the schools probably went too far in allowing, violent or threatening behavior. And I think it's very good that they realize that this is a time in life for kids to demonstrate and have strong feelings and all of that. And remember, this is all about the Gaza war and the awful things that are happening over there. My God, if there were ever something worth demonstrating forcefully about, but keep it peaceful. And I don't think that, generally speaking, the courts are going to require them to allow encampments.
That's all the time we have. I do want, Albert, if you can bring up the Katsadamas picture, because he is, as you know, someone who doesn't shy away from predictions, David Katz.
And I predicted the Supreme Court case today.
Wow, come on. Katsadamas, the Trump case, what will happen? It wraps up next week, right? Probably.
It wraps up next week. Let me save that for next show, Mark. Come on, we have to.
I love that. Okay. We'll save Katsadamas's prediction on the Trump case for the next show. Meantime, you can see him all over media and hear him all over media. David Katz is on Fox News Channel. He's on News Nation. He is across the board on any number of media outlets with what I think is some of the keenest analysis available in the field. And I'm so grateful that you come and spend Thursdays with us. Thanks, David.
I was on KCBS last week with Pat Harvey, who I was also on with during the OJ. So,
oh yeah, Pat Harvey. She's a dear friend for many years. I love Pat.
She's doing great, and I was on with her just the other week. So
that's terrific. Yeah, in Los Angeles. That's the CBS outpost in Los Angeles. Great. Well, David, we'll look and hear you in all those. See you and hear you in all those places, and we look forward to the next week. Thanks, buddy. All right.
Great to be with you. Great to be with you. Take care.
David Katz, everybody.
Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.